happening in the background. Now this third term is actually really important, and this is our infection term. So I'm going to sort of walk through it a little bit slower. The beta MW term parameter is representing the probability of transmission from an infected male to a susceptible female. And that probability is actually really low when you look at it in the literature. And we're multiplying it by the number of susceptible women who are interacting with infected men in the first population and infected men in the second population. And our C term is actually representing the number of non-protected sexual interactions that they're having per year. So ultimately, you're multiplying the probability of transmission by a probability of interacting with an infected individual by the number of times that that is occurring. So you're getting the number of total people that you're infecting per year in that term. So the infected class increases by the same term that I just described. We have the natural death rate, the background death rate, and we have an added death rate because those who have HIV are expected and do actually die at a higher rate than susceptible individuals. We treat infected individuals. Infected individuals can progress to the AIDS class. Now when we look at the AIDS class here, we have individuals that are infected or having AIDS. We can treat AIDS individuals. And then again, we have the natural death rate, but we're adding an additional death rate because those who have AIDS might be expected to die at a quicker rate. And finally, the treatment equation here. We have treated individuals from the infected class, treated individuals from the AIDS class, and then we're assuming that there's no advantage or disadvantage to being treated. But this can be changed pretty easily for the model. So those are the 4 equations. And again, there's actually 16 of them, and you can imagine that they have very similar structure for the rest of the compartments. So I'm just going to go through a few definitions before I talk about the rest. Endemic equilibria is basically a steady state where the proportion of the population actually are diseased. A disease-free equilibrium is a steady state where no diseased individuals are present. So this will be important in my definition of the basic reproductive number, or R0. So R0 is the number of susceptible people that a single infected person could infect during a specified time period. So here we are, members who are all susceptible in this room, and imagine that someone walks in with swine flu. One person walks in with swine flu. How many people in a matter of an hour could this one person infect? And that's the basic reproductive number. You can imagine that if that one person infects more than one of us, the disease is going to increase here. Whereas if that individual does not infect any of us, the proportion of people in our group is not going to, the proportion of people who are infected in our group is not going to increase. So R0 basically tells you a lot about what's happening in your model. If R0 is greater than 1, then we are going to have an epidemic, so we're going to expect an endemic equilibria. If R0 is less than 1, then the disease will die out, and we will not have an endemic equilibrium. We will have a disease-free equilibrium. So finding the basic reproductive number for our model is actually something that's very interesting to look at. And for a basic SIR model, a susceptible, infected, recovered model, the R0 is actually really easy to calculate. It's always the amount of birth that's happening over the amount of death. So how many people you're introducing over how many people you're taking out. But for our model, which is a little bit more complicated and coupled, we actually had to look into the literature for a method that worked. And we found one with Venden, Dreich, and Watmo, and it's basically taking the spectral radius of this matrix product, where those matrices are coming from the model. And I'm not going to go any further than that, but if you are interested, please do contact me. We see, though, that our R0 accurately predicts the dynamics that we're seeing in our model. So, and these are random R0 numbers, so they're not specific for anything at all. But when R0 is less than 1, it's 0.6 in this example, we see that we have disease-free equilibrium. So let me back up just 1 second. The red X's in this plot represent susceptible individuals, so people who don't have the disease. And then we have these light blue squares. Those are the total infected population. So we see that the total infected population is going to 0 after 100 years. And in this case, where R0 is greater than 1, here it's about 1.8, we do have a proportion of the population that's actually remaining constant. So we have an endemic equilibrium in this case. So R0 is actually working as we would expect it to work, which is pretty awesome. R0 is also working as we would expect it to work with varying parameter values. So again, I transmission from males to females, and betas over there is a probability of transmission from female to male. And we notice that at low, and here, low is up here, so we have very low beta WM and very low beta MW. If people aren't transmitting the disease at a very high rate, we're not going to expect there to be a lot of disease. And this is exactly what we see. At very low transmission probabilities, we don't have disease, and at very high transmission probabilities, we actually do have disease. So the basic reproductive number is acting as we would hope it would be acting. I'm going to go on here to talk about my simulations. And again, before you freak out, let me just describe what's happening here. The first row represents urban individuals. So this is the first population, and the parameters and the initial values that we've chosen are taken from data coming from a very urban area. And the second row is coming from individuals who are in rural areas. The first column is women, and the second column is men. And let me further go on to explain that the red X's are susceptible individuals, the blue circles are infected, our magenta stars are AIDS individuals, and the green triangles are treated individuals. So I'm just going to go through. We ran a bunch of simulations here. We're looking at the treatment of urban populations. So as you see, the treated individuals we have a lot of treated individuals in the urban populations, the first row. So we're treating the first row here. And we see that after about 50 years, we're able to get the infected proportions well below 10% in all populations. So we're only treating people in urban populations, but we're seeing the effect in all four populations, which seems to suggest that treating urban populations actually does what you would want it to do. It reduces HIV in all populations. But if we look at treating only rural populations, which is what the World Health Organization would suggest is equitable and fair, we see that if we're treating the second row, we don't really see an effect at decreasing the infected proportion of the populations in urban areas. We do see a decrease in rural areas, but not so much in urban areas. Now, we were also interested in looking at treating women only, because women were considered a disadvantaged population. And we see that the treatment of women, so here we're treating the first column, seems to reduce HIV prevalence in all populations after about 50 years. So it seems to be an okay method. But then when we look at combining urban and rural women and men, if we treat urban women only, so we're only treating in this upper quadrant right here, the upper left-hand quadrant, we see that we have a very big and drastic decrease in prevalence rates in almost all of the population except for the rural men. So treating urban women seems to have an effect on everyone but rural men. But when we treat rural